Hello, everybody. Hey, my name is Ryan, and welcome to our webinar today on partnering with the people. So, yeah, good to see you all. Thanks for tuning in on a Friday, the end of your week. And yeah, we're really excited to share with you all today. Um, so yeah, I'll hand it over to my co-teacher today, Megan Yarberry.
Hey everybody, it's nice to see some familiar faces in the group and some new faces, so excited to get to know everybody. As Ryan mentioned, we're going to be presenting on partnering with local communities from disaster to community development and talking about some of the different approaches taken in this kind of work. We'd really love to have your participation both in the chat and certainly during the breakout sessions if you want to unmute yourself and share ideas, because I feel like in a group like this, there's a lot of expertise and experience that you all have to offer that will sort of elevate the conversation. So we'd appreciate that very much. And just a caveat that this is an ongoing conversation about how we can better provide contextually appropriate and relevant support for different kinds of communities that are seeking to strengthen their healthcare access and resiliency. This is about what we're going to be talking about. We're doing the introductions now. We'll talk about cultural competency, which is one of the foundational pieces. Although when I started this work, it wasn't articulated as such, but over the years, I've really grown to understand the need and foundational element that this piece is. We'll do a breakout session. We'll talk about some of the different models out there. Take a short break around 3 o'clock, and then do a little more talking about how to establish partnerships and some of the different approaches there. And throughout, we'll be talking about the barefoot acupuncture model in disaster to development. And we'll finish up. All right, so Ryan, I'll let you go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Ryan Bemis, and I am director of Crossroads Community Support Healthcare, which is a nonprofit based out of Las Cruces, New Mexico. And we doing business as the Barefoot Acupuncture Movement, which is kind of a new angle on our project. We have been mostly kind of working locally for the past 10 years in the US-Mexico border region in Juarez, Mexico. And in this past year, we've started to do trainings in Central America. And so now we are kind of broadening our scope to more of a global level and offering our type of acupuncture model for under-resourced communities around the world. So yeah, I got into this work. I used to work as an addictions counselor, and that's how I learned ear acupuncture, the NADA ear acupuncture. And along my journey, I met Megan Yarberry, who was really inspired by the work that she was doing in Africa, and got a chance to learn a little bit more how to bring this ear acupuncture model to places where there's a lot of need. So yeah, I'm really excited to be here, and love sharing this stuff with you all, and always love these classes. So it's great to see some familiar faces and some new folks too.
Thanks, Ryan. And as Ryan mentioned, my name is Megan Yarberry. I've been doing acupuncture for, 22 years now, long time. And I grew up overseas primarily in like real high needs, low resource communities, and recognize the importance of sort of figuring out how to optimize resources. So that's one of the things I think that drew me into this type of work. And I started doing international projects on a personal basis, and then also doing some with partnerships with either local or international organizations since about 2005. Ran into Ryan along the way. Actually, we graduated from the same school. And yeah, so over time, we've just been having these conversations and wanting to basically create a platform where people could get together and talk about ideas and approaches and elevate all of our game. And some of the goals for today are to introduce folks to the Barefoot Acupuncture model, about how we're building partnerships and some of the basic concepts around cultural competency, creating space to explore how people interface with this subject of cultural competency and what your goals are in building partnerships and understanding how we as Barefoot Acupuncture movement can support whatever it is that you folks are interested in working on, and to offer an opportunity to explore how volunteering, mentorship, or webinars can become a part of your education and sharing in this field. And as we're going, it might be useful as acupuncture or healthcare workers providing work in these contexts, how we move beyond the conventional sort of missionary model or medical tourism models when working with vulnerable and underserved populations in these contexts. And so we really, our goal is to create projects that can be sustainable and aren't just sort of a hit and run operation.
So why is this type of work important? Can't we just go and help people? You know, how far do our good intentions go? I think about myself, how many times my own good intentions have actually led to a negative impact. So what we've learned in our project is that there are best practices for how to accompany communities facing disaster and trauma. When trauma happens, there's a break in relationship and lots of different levels. There's fracture, and that prevents progress. That inhibits relationships. So how do we discern between healthy partnership and unhealthy partnerships in this context, in this unique type of setting with vulnerable populations? For me, I've learned over the years, it comes down to a very fundamental thing. Is there space for vulnerability in the relationship, and to what extent is it about power? And how comfortable do you feel? How comfortable do I feel with someone else being vulnerable in my presence? How do you feel about being vulnerable? Because going into a situation of humanitarian assistance is an experience of being vulnerable. How attached are you to the outcome of what you envision? And how invested are you in the messy process in getting there? Because this work can be messy. Working in humanitarian aid can be very challenging. When I started working in Juarez, Mexico, it was at the time called the murder capital of the world, and it was a very messy situation. So a big challenge for me was surrendering to the messiness of it all, the challenges of communication across spotty phone service and internet coverage, finding my way around the maze of a messy city at times. And so that was my work. So what's the work that you know deep down that you need to do? What trauma of your own do you need to work on to resolve? And how can you show up with an open heart in order to be able to be in a place of vulnerability, but in relationship at the same time in a messy situation? And we'll have a little more time to reflect more later on these.
All right, so we're just going to dive into cultural competency because the nature of the work that we're doing, by definition, it's really in diverse communities. Often we're going to be in a culture or a community that we're not as familiar with. So we wanted to sort of start the conversation about cultural competency by defining some terms. So culture refers to the integrated patterns of human behavior. And these could include things like language or thoughts, communications, actions, customs, beliefs, values, all kinds of things that apply to a racial, ethnic, religious, or other type of social group. And competence obviously is implying that we have the capacity to function effectively in that setting. So cultural competence is a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that come together to enable effective work in those cross-cultural settings. Here are a few points about the principles of cultural competence. So we want to define culture broadly, such as the community that lives in such and such a town or a province or a country. But within that community, recognize that there are microcosms, and those might be, for example, youth culture might be very different than the elder culture. Or if you're working in a place where there's, a significant population of drug addicts, they have their own culture. And those cultures may be actually conflicting or in opposition to each other. So recognizing that that might be the case. We want to value our clients' cultural beliefs. And again, this can put you a little bit in the middle. For example, if you're working in a place where there's a strong tradition of local medicine, traditional belief systems, and then there's an educated class that sort of derides that traditional belief system or approach to medicine. So where are you going to come in to that conversation? Recognize complexity in the language interpretation. I found this kind of a surprise when I started doing things in other languages. We worked in Haiti with Creole and in a lot of French-speaking countries. And occasionally we've had interpreters come in. And I recognized over time that it's super important that those interpreters maybe have a medical background as you're describing, different anatomical terms or locations, how to find a point. And then there's the whole world of Oriental medicine, right? So that has its own unique terms and philosophies. So if the person doing your interpretation doesn't understand those concepts, something is definitely going to get lost in translation. So recognizing that complexity of language. You want to facilitate learning between the provider and the community. I think Ryan and I can both vouch for the fact that when you go into these places, you are definitely going to be learning way more than what you're going to be offering to them. So we'll talk more about that a little bit later, but in doing this, seek out opportunities to learn from a variety of sources and experiences. You want to involve the community in defining and addressing service needs, and that's going to be very crucial when you're bringing in these new ideas and tools, right? So a lot of places where you might end up, they might have no experience with acupuncture, might not have ever heard of it. So you need to work with local folks to figure out how that's going to translate into that setting. You'll end up collaborating with other agencies, so it's important to identify the local, state, and international agencies that work in a community. And it's also useful to find out, like, what is the local perception of those organizations. So for example, here in the US, we might think, oh yeah, the UNHCR, that's a solid organization. But if you're in Haiti and you know that there are, some things, like they had some health outbreaks, some disease outbreaks based on the UN peacekeepers coming in. So they had a different perception of that organization. With this idea about other agencies, you'll also want to identify who are the gatekeepers. So that might be, for example, a state institution like the Ministry of Health, or it may be local religious leaders that sort of open doors for you. And you can professionalize treatment and training. That's basically establishing clear, understanding between all the stakeholders. You may come in with your own guidelines, but these are going to have to be translated into this new context. And they may change over time, right? So you might come up with your guidelines and your training program or treatment program, and then over time you see, wow, that's really not working. So, be willing to adapt and be flexible. And improved access to and quality of care is the outcome measure that is going to indicate whether whatever you're implementing and the policies that you have around what you're doing are culturally and linguistically appropriate. So just some different ideas to keep in mind as you think about cultural competency.
any questions about, what is cultural competency? Any questions anybody has about it so far?
I
Yeah, Wasim.
I came to deal with it here in Lebanon. Can you guys see me? Maybe not. When I first got here and I went to a couple of the nonprofits and the NGOs that do medical work, within Lebanon, there's so many religious sects, and within the general Lebanese Arabic culture, there's like maybe 30 subcultures, and then 30 or maybe 100 below that, another layer. And one of the issues we dealt with is how are you going to needle Shiite Muslim women or Shiite or any of the Christian right that cover their heads, like there's or nunneries or establishments. Like how are you going to handle that? And that's one of the reasons I was telling you about diversifying geographically within Lebanon, having multiple sites, because of that cultural barrier, and then the people not trusting outsiders coming in to do work on them. So how did you guys handle Haiti?
So what might actually speak to what you brought up, I really appreciate you sharing that, because when we were on the coast of Kenya, it's a very strong Muslim culture, and there were some similar questions about like how are you going to needle women when they've got their burqa, or if you've got a man providing treatments and there are women that want to receive treatments, how do you handle that? So in collaboration with the local leaders, we found ways around each of those, and it sometimes depends on the specific location. Oftentimes we would separate treatment sites, so there would be a room for the women and a room for the men. The males treating females wasn't as much of an issue because oftentimes like there's a male doctor that will treat a female patient, and as long as there's a female nurse in the room, then that is more acceptable. So in the context of delivering healthcare, it's a little bit more accepted. Yeah.
It's certainly a big thing to look into, and when you're going internationally outside of our comfort zones and our local communities, for sure.
Yeah, for me, cultural competence is really at the heart of it. It's just my own personal growth. I grew up in Wyoming. It's not a very diverse state, and so every year since I was 18 years old, it's just been a constant process of unpeeling the layers of my own biases, of my own prejudices, of the unconscious and then the conscious things going on inside me that impact my ability to be in relationship with people who I have difference with. So, three things around cultural competence. To grow in cultural competence, one is learning about other cultures, right? And there's a lot of really good reads on understanding other cultures, how other types of groups understand healthcare, understand health and sickness. Two, it's like immersing yourself into other cultures. That was a huge part of me stretching me out of my own comfort zone. And then three, doing my work, because going into those situations and facing this, it's not just like cultural competence stuff that you could just like read in a book, and then just download in your brain. Is something that really needs to be integrated because it's so relational. This is a picture from a training we did a year ago in Coban, Guatemala, for a group of indigenous health workers, part of a women's cooperative in Coban, and this was a really fun training, but it definitely stretched me out of my comfort zone. It was trilingual, so we had I was translating from Spanish into English, and then we had a group that spoke only Quechua, and so we had another translator helping us. And so I've done a lot of trainings. I'm I can talk a lot. I can, cover a lot of ground as a teacher in a very short amount of time. And I've got my little curriculum down. I've done this over and over. I know how to teach this stuff. But when I got there and we were faced with a very different culture that I've been in, and another language we had to roll in, so we're covering 3 languages, it really forced me to slow down and to really pare things down and to distill things down into the essence. Over the course of the week we're there, I got used to this very slow cadence of sharing, sitting, waiting for the translator, letting people take it in, having questions filter back to the translator. And but it was so, that was definitely out of my comfort zone, but it was really, really helpful for me, and I felt like it just allowed me to sink into a different style as a teacher. So if you have a little piece of paper, or if you've got a little something on your phone to draw on and pull up a blank page, I invite you to take something out. And just draw a little circle, just like that on the page. If you've got that handy, or you can close your eyes and you can mentally think about it too, right? So if you got your circle, right in the middle of the circle, write down something that you're really good at. That is like your bread and butter, that it's so easy for you to do. It's your thing. And on the edge of the circle, right? On the edge of the circle, I want you to write down one thing out towards the border of that circle that you struggle with, but you're capable of doing. And then on the outside, I want you to put down something that you really don't like doing and you're not good at it. And so, there's lots of different things you can do to kind of self-reflect on this. But not just what you're good at, but different, I guess, levels of where your comfort zone is. And so the edge of that circle there, that is where our growing edge is. That's where your growing edge is, where my growing edge is, right? And there's lots of things that are outside of that circle, far outside of the circle, that I don't like doing and that I'm really not good at. And so those are things that maybe are going to take a lot more time to develop. And maybe there's a lot of things out there that I don't really need to be as involved in. I can get help from other people. I can work with other people like Megan, right? Who has different skills, who has different passions than myself, right? And so us working together, right? Then I don't have to do everything in there, right? Right. And there's things out there in those far fields that may be, I might not be the best one to even try to learn how to do that. There may be someone else that I'm working with from that community, or a colleague out and about, who can help with that part. But the areas that I want to focus on, that I found to help, is focusing on that edge, that growing edge, the things that I'm not very good at it, but I'm capable of doing, and so there's different types of cultural layers too that you can add into this, things that you're comfortable with. What kind of food do you like? What kind of food you don't really like, but you could probably get used to, and what types of food you can't stand at all. And understanding those 3 things, I found it can really help me a lot, have helped me a lot. Living in other cultures has never been easy for me. I feel like I have very picky food habits, very picky sleep habits, and so, you know, and those all impact when I go into another place, going down to just the level of what am I eating, you know, and what's the day-to-day rhythm like. But being aware of my growing edge allows me to be able to roll with it a little easier, so I can get something out of that experience, even if it's hard.
Yeah, and hopefully we'll be able to share some of our diagrams in one of the breakouts. That was actually super helpful, Ryan. Wow, I love the enlightening. Okay. Oh, let's go here first. So we're going to talk about some of the different models that are out there, and because we're using these terms that are a little bit buzzwordy, what we mean by humanitarian aid here is that it can be called humanitarian aid or humanitarian relief, but it's a fundamental, quote, fundamental expression of the universal value of solidarity between people and a moral imperative, unquote. So it's the material and logistical assistance that's given to people who need the help. And this is usually short term because the community doesn't have the resilience to provide all of its own needs. It needs some supplemental help. So developmental aid, by contrast, is where it's addressing those absences in the community's ability to resolve its own issues when it goes through stress or crisis. So this addresses like the underlying socioeconomic factors, so that, you know, you might come in to do disaster relief, but you might go out by providing the training that provides that community to provide their own relief and, you know, like trauma treatment or whatever else it might be, that next time that happens, they will be able to respond to their own disaster. And so you're basically like working yourself out of being needed.
So, sorry, I'm in my notes. So there's a few models out there for, you know, providing aid that differ in philosophy and approach. And so here's a few other, I guess, constructs to understand and to be aware of and to be conscious of. There's, you know, one model is medical tourism, which is going to another place to help people. And in the project that I work with in Juarez, there are places where there are buildings that were built for an outside aid group to come in and offer clinical services, and they offered them for a few months and then they left an empty building. And so that, you know, that's an example of medical tourism, and the people in that community, you know, don't complain, that they don't say that the people didn't help them through that project. It's just that it didn't sustain itself because it wasn't created in a way to where the local people could take ownership from it and benefit from it and offer ongoing services. So missionary mindset, what are we talking about with that? So this is kind of a, I guess the term comes out of the Christian evangelicism, going out to convert, you know, the people of the world. A lot of medical services historically have been offered by Christian missionaries, you know, both in monastic communities as well as missionaries going out around the world and helping people. And there's nothing wrong with healthcare taking place in a faith-based orientation or anything like that. But the missionary mindset really is, you know, the assumption is that that there's an agenda that's brought in as the outsider, right? That the people that you're working with are missing something, and you're giving it to them. So, and both medical tourism and missionary mindset, I mean, there's no model that's completely, you know, I'm an outsider working in these other places, and there's no model that's completely devoid of these dynamics. Just being aware of them and being oriented to what you're doing. So, charity, and welfare. So that's another, a form of aid, where you're just, giving things to people. In Nicaragua, I worked in a project where every once in a while we get a big train crate filled with a bunch of random stuff and a lot of junk that churches in the United States would just send to people. And I remember we unpacked one truckload, and it was we found a basketball rim with no net and no backboard, just a hoop. And so this is a common form of aid that often comes with a huge tax write-off for the lender. So the elephant in the room here is that the assumption that the missionaries' beliefs and practices are superior to the local populations, okay? And people can have the best of intentions, right, with this. The challenge is that with the missionary mindset, it's a slippery slope to becoming an agent or a tool of oppression or even colonialization, imposing a foreign system where it may not be relevant, where in fact it could destabilize a society. Outside aid coming in can actually do harm to the local healthcare system, discrediting traditional practices, frameworks, and beliefs. So with acupuncture, we want to be mindful of this, right? What is our agenda? We are really, what we strive for in the Barefoot Acupuncture movement is customized capacity building. So what do we mean by that? So strengthening skills, competencies, and abilities and community so they can achieve their goals. So we're giving them tools and resources for them to achieve their goals, and helping them to overcome things that prevent them from being healthy. And for me, it's always important, and I found it really very important from the first time I started working over in Mexico, is articulating my intentions, as it's a really important first step when I'm partnering with a group. I'm here to put these tools in your hands eventually, so you need me less, so you can do this on your own. So stating that intention allows me to lay a foundation for building, a more sustainable project. I can't deny my desire to help people, to be the one that wants to help people. I'm a caretaker by nature, right? I got to own that. I come from a Christian background. There's the missionary inside of me. There's the tourist in me that wants to travel. There's the voyeur in me. So are you aware when that missionary mindset comes online? That's what it's about. It's not about kind of, ridding this sinful idea in my head, forever. It's about being aware and conscious of it. Because denying that we bring those things into these settings, denying them can really harm and impact our ability to build relationships. It's not about having the purest heart. It's about self-awareness. It's about my biases. It's about owning my privilege. It's about answering the question, what's driving the bus here? Who's driving the bus? And that's a constant question in my own personal journey.
I would like to add one thing to that, Ryan. When we started doing trainings on the coast, it was 2008, trained a bunch of folks. One person there was just a superstar in what he was able to go out and do afterward, and we continued to work closely together. Eventually, he started training with me, so he was my co-trainer, and I eventually was teaching him like body points and treatment, approaches and how to deal with patients and safety and all kinds of stuff, to the point where he is now attempting to be a practitioner. Like that's what he wants to do as his business. Otherwise he's a fisherman. Like that was his past life. But he cannot make a living because there are folks from outside the country coming in. It's a beautiful area, so they come for vacation basically and provide free treatments for people. So he can't earn a living because there are outside people coming in and providing free treatments. So in a certain way, that was really enlightening for me to consider how what we're offering, whether it's donations, charity, like our external approach, or providing free services, how that can undermine the local economy and social structures.
All right. So we're going to do a breakout session here. We're going to divide us into 2 groups. Give me just a minute to divide us up. We have 21 of us. Okay. So we're going to need 10 per group. So just give me a second, but let's go ahead and just kind of maybe there's a few questions we're going to ask you to share on in these groups. So we'll probably have a very short time to share. So if everybody can just kind of take a minute, take some deep breaths, and just breathe into these questions, and then we'll jump into these in just a second. Okay, so we'll have 10 minutes and we'll automatically get brought back here when we're done, okay? Okay, welcome back, everybody.
All right, so we're going to run through this last bit kind of quickly so we can all have a little bit of a break. But these are some dichotomies about partnership, like if either or, basically. So that first one, partnership versus charity, it's that idea about if you give a person a fish, then they're going to eat for a day, or if you teach them to fish, they're going to, you know, have the tools to take care of themselves and they no longer need you, which is kind of the point. So that idea about creating resilience. Survivors versus victims. I really recognize this when I went in and worked with the refugee community, thinking, oh, these poor people, they've been through all this trauma. And of course, that's all true. But a lot of them were better educated than me, or they had like richer experiences. And then they had this situation that put them into this, like, you know, the title of refugee. And that alone has its own connotations and whatnot. So having to recognize, oh, I'm bringing assumptions to who these people are by virtue of that title. The idea of empowerment versus dependence. So codependence is maladaptive and dysfunctional when one partner is dependent on the dependency of the other partner. So we really want to make sure that we are not doing that, where we are creating a situation where the population we're working with is reliant on us, beyond like giving them the tools to take it forward themselves. So empowerment means that your role is going to change over time as the partner's tools and expertise evolve. And then, as we were just talking in our breakout group, the idea of a long-term commitment versus just wanting to do sort of a short-term, you know, I'm going to come over and see and do a good deed and then feel good about myself and then go home and like share a PowerPoint with my church group or my, you know, my college or whatever it might be. Accountability versus not taking responsibility. I was thinking about this during our breakout as well, where if there is something that isn't working, sometimes I have the self-awareness to know, like, oh yeah, I have these issues or these biases or these assumptions that I need to address and curb as I'm cultivating this relationship. But sometimes it might be that something's not working and it's because I haven't recognized my own complicity in an unhealthy dynamic or in not recognizing a situation and therefore being able to address it. So taking the accountability to change things if they're not working.
And Megan, can you turn off the presenter? Can you put it on the presenter mode there real quick?
On the presenter mode, yes. Okay, let's see.
Or I think it might be in the sharing features.
Oh, okay. Okay, let me do this for a second. And this, and then. Does that work? Or is that the same thing? Oh, that's the same thing. Okay, let me just take it. Sorry, guys. I'm flunking around here. Okay, I think I got it now. How's that?
Great. Can you still hear me? My screen just went blank. Okay. So we were originally had kind of envisioned this webinar being able to kind of cover the full gamut of the different types of models and our model of our approach to community trauma, you know, working with people all the way from disaster to long-term development. And that's a big part of what we do with the Barefoot Acupuncture movement. But you know, really, we decided kind of just to lay the foundation with this particular webinar on partnerships. You know, because you can have like a really great model, right? But if there's not the relational matrix, you know, to make it work, then it's not going to be effective long term. You can go to the next slide there. We have we've seen this to be possible in our work in Latin America and Africa. You know, putting tools and capacity to care so that people can care for their own community with minimal dependence on outside aid. This is what our vision is. We've seen this to be true. The question is like, how can we do this in this modern day you know, landscape, in this context that we're in? You know, we don't have a cookie cutter approach. There's no perfect recipe, no simple answers. You know, especially now with all of the questions that the pandemic leaves us in cities like Juarez, where, you know, we hear that things are continuing to deteriorate over there. And in the words of a friend of mine, it's worse than it's ever been over there. Violence, poverty, unemployment, people literally are falling down on the streets of Juarez, dying from COVID because the health system is not adequate enough to care for them. And so, but now, you know, we're also hearing stories of how they're finding these little ways to help their neighbors with acupuncture. At least sometimes just their families, who a lot of them have had COVID, some of our students. And so seeing that, you know, seeing and supporting what they're doing. And our hope is to be able to offer this in other places around the world. Go to the next slide. There are a few groups out there in the world that we really admire. We feel like these aren't really necessarily acupuncture groups, but they really have a long-term trajectory. They are committed to building, you know, relationships at the local level and building local capacity. All right, do the next one. And so, yeah, so today we decided to kind of just focus this webinar on building partnerships, relationship building. So let's take a 5-minute break with that. Oh, we got one more for the break. Sorry about that. Okay, so partnership, you know, in this type of work, I like to be in partnership with a buddy like Megan, somebody who's been there and done that, somebody who's gone through different challenges that I might go through in this work. It's about being in partnership with others, but it's also about being in partnership with myself. I have to trust myself if I want to learn how to trust others, if I want them to trust me, you know. So how much do you trust yourself? Something to think about. Let's take a quick break, about 5 minutes, and we'll be back here about 3:05. All right, why don't we circle back up? We want to make sure you all get the most out of the most we can offer you in our short time together today. So yeah, so we've kind of been introducing some stuff around partnerships so far. Another word that I think is communicates a lot on doing this work, and it's a word that Paul Farmer, you know, employs a lot is the concept of accompaniment, right? You know, as opposed to like leading or carrying people, but accompanying them, right? As health providers, how do we accompany our patients and not just be out to cure them and fix them? Now, for me, building networks, you know, finding my way in this world of, you know, social networks and different types of networks that we're connected to, and now a lot of us are connected on these Zoom. For me, my experience, this is where being comfortable with vulnerability really, really comes in handy. Because, you know, network building can be scary, can bring a lot of social anxiety up for me. Cold calling is and approaching people and pitching an idea and sharing a concept that you don't know how they're going to take it. You don't know them. You've got a 30-second or 10-second elevator speech ready. It's you know, it's a very vulnerable place to be in. You know, I was in acupuncture school in 2010, and I sent a 2-sentence email to a guy named Raul, the head of the Juarez City Addictions Programs in 2010, and I attached Megan's article on her project in Kenya, and that led to a conversation. But it wasn't until 9 years later, 2019, that we actually did a training hosted by the Juarez City Mental Health Department. And I remember how scary it was to send that email, and that relationship took lots and lots of years to cultivate. But he's an active volunteer now with our work with migrants in Juarez.
Yeah, so networking is actually one of the things that I put in the center of my circle, Ryan. And I think, like, for me, I feel like being a conduit is part of my purpose in life. So connecting people with ideas and resources. And so it almost seems like, for me, if I see myself as the vessel, meaning that all the good stuff is coming out of me personally, then I get all head trippy about it. Whereas I see if I am connecting people with things that will be advantageous for their group or for their community, you know, I'm just passing along something that is passing through me. It is not of me. And I think that helps me sort of mentally frame it in such a way that I love doing it, because I love that idea of, you know, if this person had this idea or this tool, then they, you know, they flourish. So this idea about networking is going to connect you obviously with potential partners. And it's going to require that you put yourself in the flow of information and communication. So here's a couple of ways that you can sort of lay this foundation for healthy partnerships. So first of all, you're going to want to get informed. And that would be by listening to local news or signing up for newsletters or notifications from local agencies of sort of your target area. It could be attending conferences and workshops related to that identified project site. So for example, we were working toward doing a project in the Congo, and my partner in this project, Beth Cole, who's in Florida, she saw that there was a speaker. It was something about human rights, and the woman was from Goma, the town where we wanted to end up. And so she went and listened to the talk, and then she went up and talked to the speaker, and that created this whole new sort of matrix of possible connections. So finding your way into that immersion sort of experience of information coming out of that area. And then you move into where you're trying to communicate with these network opportunities that have come up. And that's going to require you to reach out to potential stakeholders and decision makers. And so you really want to have you want to communicate with integrity, yeah? So it's really important to have clear objectives. having done this work for a while, then sometimes people will reach out to me and they'll say something super vague, like, I'd really love help with this project. Well, I don't know what to do with that. If you say, this is my project, this is what I want to do, this is what I need from you, then I know what to do with that. And that's me. So that's, how I communicate. And the person that you're trying to communicate may not be that sort of blunt, and it may be more necessary to do sort of honorifics and how's your family, how are things going, before you get into the nuts and bolts of what you're trying to do. So being aware that there are these different styles of communication, being timely in your responses, being respectful, and through bringing this kind of awareness to your communications, the potential partners are that you're going to develop are going to rise to the surface, because they're going to be people that you click with and who you guys can understand each other, and then it's going to be from those platforms that you're going to build out a project, basically. So then once you've defined who your potential partners are, then you start to say, well, this is what I can do in this story, and what are you gonna do, or what do you need me to do, so that there's a clear sort of program of expectations and roles and who's responsible for it, almost like an MOU, but it's probably going to evolve over time, and it's going to take time. So recognize that your timeline may not be that other partners. Like, they may be thinking in 10-year terms, and you may be thinking, what am I going to do next year, during this period that I have some time off. So keep your long-term goals at the top of your mind, so that the relationship, as it is evolving, that you're both navigating according to your North Star, as opposed to the stoplight down the street, right? This is one example of a really sort of dumb luck networking that happened for us. We were doing a project in Nairobi, and we were going to go to the coast after we were done doing this training. And so I did some research of are there any drug rehab places over there? And I found this Omari project. It was funded in part by UNHCR, by the Kenyan government, but it was very locally based, and I liked that about it. So I, wrote to the director and asked him, could we come and just have a chat about what we do, and we'd like to learn more about your organization. And that led to our doing a training for their staff. So they had a drug treatment program in Malindi on the coast. And then, because they were also working in the prisons, they were going out to do drug, addiction treatment in the prisons. We ended up doing some trainings for the prison staff in a couple of different places. They also had a network of other rehabs that they worked with up and down the Kenyan and Tanzanian coast. So we ended up doing different trainings through those folks. They also had been training youth volunteers in some of the more geographically remote areas, like these tiny little islands off the coast of Kenya. And so we would go up there and train those youth volunteers in how to do some of the different support techniques for addiction.
So, in building networks, it's important to check our assumptions, check our baggage. I assume this security guard, the migrant shelter in Juarez, would not be interested in getting acupuncture. Sister Alicia did not make that assumption. Maybe I've got my own authority issues, that are playing out there, but it turns out he really wanted it. So go ahead, next slide. So when we started training church ministers how to do acupuncture over Mexico, I assumed that we should not talk about yin and yang in a class with nuns and priests, that's being hosted by the Catholic diocese. And then our first day of our first training, this priest asked, well, what about the yin and yang and all of this within the first few hours? So he set the tone, he brought the subject forward, and we followed, and we had this amazing discussion about Jesus and yin and yang. And at the same time, there's a lot of conservative elements in the churches in Juarez. They've outlawed Reiki, they've outlawed yoga. They haven't outlawed acupuncture yet. We want to keep it that way. We don't want blunt opposition. There are people that think it's witchcraft within the churches. So while it might be okay for in a classroom with this priest, he's opening up the subject to talk about yin and yang. When they're doing acupuncture after mass with people sitting in pews, they don't talk about yin and yang, and we really discourage them from doing so. Now, when you find yourself having an assumption, you can actually kind of think of it in terms of a story. You know, I have a story in my head about something, that's an assumption. And so for me, working through these assumptions is, having the courage to be vulnerable and to own up to them. And if you're human, then you're going to be making a lot of assumptions. So if you're in this type of work, you're going to be sorting through a lot of this on a constant basis. It's great to have a teammate there, to have daily debriefing sessions, a mentor to touch base with when you find yourself sliding into assumptions. But you can also clean up your assumptions by asking. You can ask the other person, I have this story in my head about you, and it's this. I was wondering if that's correct, and if not, can you share more so I can understand you better? Really having the courage to be very direct about that and own up to that. And I'm surprised people really respect that. And then it opens up this new conversation. Then I really get to know this person, right? And it's no longer just this person is a story in my head, but I'm really getting to know the real them. Or you can just tell it to yourself. Okay, I am making up a story about this person. What is it about me that I'm not open to just being present and learning more about them through this process? Go ahead. Go ahead, Meg.
So instead of basing decisions on what you think you know, it's really important to ask questions, to be aware that there's lots going on under the surface that you may not, understand or be absorbing. So it's really useful to listen actively. So when somebody's saying like whatever they're saying, to paraphrase it back to them. Because if you get it wrong, then they'll be able to clarify, no, actually, this is what I meant over here. And then to invite them also to do the same. So you kind of getting what I'm saying, or, to establish that you're both hearing each other. It's also really easy to get triggered by someone else's comments, or even how their, like facial expression is or something like that, especially when our defenses are up. So if I'm thinking, oh, I'm going to have to like really convince this authority figure that this program is great and that they really want it, because I want the community to benefit, and you've got community folks on board. And then you might interpret something that they do or say as a shutdown. So it might shut you down, and then, your chest tightens up and your pulse is quickening. So take a minute to just breathe through that, take a deep breath. And then if possible, you can wait for your initial emotion to dissipate. And then once you've done that, you may find that whatever was done or said was like really innocuous, or didn't have any, emotional charge as you might have interpreted it. It's really useful to always assume the positive. Like, we're all going to make assumptions because we need them to like move forward in life to some extent. But check if you're making a negative assumption, like, oh, these are religious people, so they're going to be super conservative and restrictive in how they want to interpret, this medicine, for example. So instead of doing that, think these people, because they are religious, want the best for their community. So come into it like thinking of the most positive, interpret things the most positively that you can. Because if you're going to make assumptions, might as well make them positive. So if you want to avoid conflict in a team or within partnerships, it's super important to encourage teamwork. Again, clarifying those goals and roles and expectations, so there's no like, oh, well, I thought that you were going to do that, or I've been waiting for you to follow through on that piece, when the other person didn't even know that was an expectation. Again, taking that with personal responsibility. Expressing appreciation. I find this is really important because it's just nice to hear when something that you did was meaningful, so you can say, okay, that's a useful thing, I'm going to do some more of that. So likewise, giving that to the other person of like, this was really valuable when you stepped in and like told me what was up with this dynamic that was happening, or whatever it might be. And then regular communication. So as you lapse communication, then again, all those assumptions can start weaving in, people get distracted. So having some sort of cadence with your communication. And expectations are really just assumptions about the future. So again, an emphasis on mitigating those assumptions because conflicts can occur when your experience differ from those of your partners. So it's more useful to convert a bunch of expectations into a shared understanding of the facts, and then you could all move forward based on that. There were some assumptions that we had when we went into that prison training in coastal Kenya. One of them was based on my understanding of some prison projects in the UK and also my own experience in the US of doing acupuncture projects within prisons, was a hypervigilance around bringing sharps into prisons or having strangers come in. So I thought when we addressed the administrators, we took a lot of care and put a lot of attention into our safety protocols and whatnot. And they had no concern about that at all. In fact, when we went into the prison yard, we realized that in the middle of the prison yard, they would do haircuts. And so they would sit the person on the stool and then they would shave their head with razor blades and then they would throw the razor blades on the ground. So there are all these razor blades all over the ground. So you're like, okay, that's not a deal here. Another assumption that we had was, I don't know if you guys have heard about that. I think it was Stanford did that prison guard experiment. And they had the prison guards and then the prisoners, and then everyone went a little crazy and went way too deep into those rules. So we had this idea about prison guards and prisoners are antithetical and antagonistic. And so we don't want to train prison guards because the prisoners won't want to receive treatment from them. But that was completely incorrect as well, because this is a fairly small community and a lot of them were related, and the prisoners were living in the prison, but then the prison guards were actually stationed in military barracks near the prison as well. So that was they were all part of the same community. Yeah.
So, another important thing for me about building partnerships and finding my way, working along the border. Here's a picture of the Rio Grande and the border wall, and this is a picture from the Juarez side of it. And so kind of finding my way in this border context is really just immersing myself in the local issues and what's going on there. And for me, I spent a lot of time studying and learning about what was going on in Juarez, and connecting with journalists and activists. Actually, were two groups of people that were very helpful in learning and just taking a genuine interest in it with no agenda in other than just learning, a blank page, just okay, I don't know anything what's going on here. I'm gonna learn from the ground up. And so one of these activists that I met early on, happened to be doing this Tai Chi group at a church in Juarez, and we were just driving around Juarez. She was showing me around Juarez, and she asked me what I do, and I said I do acupuncture, and she's like, "Oh, I got this Tai Chi group. Why don't you come do acupuncture at this Tai Chi group?" And that was kind of the first big step in this, in getting connected with this group that surprisingly was really interested in getting acupuncture. It wasn't what I expected. And it just started from, I want to learn about what's going on in the place. So, other journalists have connected us with other projects that we didn't know about around the city that also wanted to learn acupuncture, and we were actually eventually able to do trainings with them. So activists and journalists are very well connected, but really taking a genuine interest in the local landscape is the local situation, really important before going into a place where there's a lot of problems. Resiliency, I think learning about the local context, and going beyond, going beyond the headlines of and the larger narrative about that the world says what's going on in this area, and getting to know the people was really key for me in understanding that the real story underneath the problems in Juarez are people that are extremely resilient. And that's really the foundation for how acupuncture fits in. Because, and you know, a lot of people that we've worked with haven't had a lot of tools or resources in being able to learn how to help somebody who's got severe anxiety. But with a few days of training and some really simple needles and some guidance and techniques, we've seen them to be able to be a part of increasing their own community's ability to endure the stress. So go to the next slide. We're going to do a 15-minute breakout session around these questions. So I don't know if these questions come up in the breakout session. So you might want to just, I don't know, take a screenshot or take a picture, write a few notes down, or just take a minute to reflect on, you know, what partnerships do you have right now? You know, what partnerships could you explore? And it doesn't have to be in an acupuncture project. It could be at any level in your daily life. I mean, it's hard to build partnerships in this time when we're all at home, but you know, maybe we can put that in the chat. But and then what does support look like in helping you build partnerships? What's your growing edge in building partnerships? How does privilege show up in your partnership? So a few questions to go a little deeper into how building partnerships intersects with you. And I want to do 4 breakout sessions. I'm going to have Phyllis and Mallory help facilitate the other group. So give me a second. Let's see if we can get this breakout time to go a little smoother than the last one. I think people are just kind of trickling back from the other rooms. And for those of you who are back right now, any questions you all have? We're kind of coming to the end of our webinar. We'll get wrapped up when everybody's back in, but any questions anybody has for me?
That was fast.
I know, yeah. 15 minutes goes pretty fast. So.
If I can just comment, it's just amazing and so interesting because acupuncture and the NADA protocol alone is so accessible and it can be applied in so many ways, and we connect, you know, and on a micro level and macro level. It's just really lovely. And it never ceases to amaze me, and it's really a gift, as frustrating as it can be.
Yeah, I don't know if everybody knows what the NADA protocol is, but we've kind of thrown that word out there throughout this webinar today, and people.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I feel like it's common. No, I mean, I'm surprised at how many people in our group, you know, are really really versed in NADA. You know, a lot of us come out of that movement. You know, I don't know if everybody knows what it is. It's a National Acupuncture Detoxification Association protocol. It's a 5-point protocol, and our webinars do offer an introduction to what is NADA. So if you want to learn more, I'll put in the chat a link to our webinars that we have available online. You can learn more about stuff like NADA. But yeah, I mean, it's like it's such a web and a great network for us to build on and to build partnerships. The NADA movement is you know, connects where we were talking to people from Australia here, and Wasim is over in Lebanon, and then Megan's over in Hawaii. And so, you know, NADA's this thing that makes partnerships. Well, for me, it makes partnerships a little bit easier to do. Right, NADA it's like a tool for helping to make partnerships possible. So yeah, so if you don't know anything about it, feel free to reach out to us and we can share more. And then I just put that link in about our classes on the NADA protocol.
And I just wanted to mention that in our breakout group, we talked briefly about like the diagram that you talked about at the beginning and what you're solid at in the middle, and then the things that your growing edge on the circumference, and then, you know, the things out in left field. And then our conversation evolved, and it occurred to me that what we ended up talking about was that same diagram, but applied to this approach to providing support, community support. So like there's things that we as providers or as organizers are really solid at in this work. And then the growing edge where we really need to grow into certain things like getting the gatekeepers of laws and funding to open them up for this thing that we, have solidly shown is useful in communities. So anyway, it was just a thought I had out of our breakout group.
Yeah, we would like to do a follow-up webinar, although we don't have something concretized yet, to kind of pick up where this webinar leaves off. If you kind of stay connected with, with what we're doing, then we'll let you know when we have another one. But I really would like to do a follow-up webinar and really breaking down the barriers to bringing NADA in, for offering this NADA as an acupuncture, as a resilience building model. I think there's a lot we could flesh out to really look into what are the barriers, what are the possibilities. Yeah, it's a huge kind of sprawling subject. And so yeah, there's our contact information if you want to reach out to get if you can go back up a few slides there, Megan. There you go. If you want to schedule a time for a follow-up kind of debrief on this, kind of one-on-one, we're happy to meet with you to talk about what are your needs, how we can support you. We do kind of have a new Barefoot Collective group of organizers and trainers that we're really trying to create to provide a group of us being able to work together to mobilize, to organize, to work together, to collaborate, to support people like Wasim out in Lebanon, working to get NADA going out there, and for their own projects. So if you go to our website, barefootacupuncturemovement.com, there's a place where you can actually apply to be part of the Barefoot Collective, and there are several webinars and that we have to offer also that might be a good primer to seeing if this is a good, if what we do is a good fit for what you're looking for. We are a nonprofit organization, and donations go to support what we're working on around the world right now. And the Barefoot Collective is also kind of a mentorship track for people that really want to become trainers and really want to learn how to do these types of projects, get direct support. I know some of you in here have already reached out to us. We've been in conversation. But if it's hard to get individualized support in a classroom setting like this. But we're here to set up a time to meet with you so we can understand more deeply, what do you want to do, right? What are your goals, to see if we have the resources and support to be a part of your journey, to accompany you, right? To help you to learn how to accompany the community you're in, or a community outside where you're in, where you're hoping to build a project. So and if you have anything else you want to add to that, Megan. Hey, you there, Megan?
Yes, I have nothing else to add to that.
Okay.
Sorry.
And then Megan had I think the next slide, you maybe can show them the little bibliography. I think I sent you some readings. Here's some other readings that we recommend. Any questions that anybody has for Megan and I?
One thing I'd say about this this topical reading, it's all about cross-cultural healthcare delivery. So being a reader, I love all this stuff. And I'm actually reading that last one, Fevers, Feuds, and Diamonds. That one came out, I think, on November 17th by Paul Farmer, the fellow that started Partners in Health. does amazing work all over the world. And I'm currently listening to his. He's got Pathologies of Power, Health, Human Rights, and the New War on the Poor. It's definitely not a cherry read, but it's so informative and really fleshing out some of the issues that come up in doing this type of work, where you're doing cross-cultural healthcare access, delivery, training, treatment. And we can add this. Ryan's going to be sending out a follow-up email with a couple of questions for you, and we can add this list to that, so you don't have to worry about writing it all down.
Yeah, we'll send a little survey to you by email, and we really value your support. I mean, value your feedback and how we can, improve the types of webinars. We've done several of these throughout the past 6 months since COVID came on scene. And all the webinars are available. The pre-recordings are available through Eventbrite. So I'll post that again one more time in case you'd like to go. For right now, they're on Eventbrite. Probably come January, we're going to move them into our new website. So yeah. Yeah. Any other questions for us about about anything we've covered today? Or anything else you wanted to, any questions you came to this webinar with that you were hoping to get answered that we didn't get a chance to cover?
So I have a question. I realize that, Barefoot is a movement, sort of an initiative, right? And the aim is to grow a caring global community that's out there helping people in varieties of areas. But are we using NADA as the tool for our community, or are we diversifying with herbs? Are we diversifying with body acupuncture and other healing modalities? What is our bond?
Yeah. So, we have been developing a full body acupuncture curriculum over the past 10 years in Juarez. We learned kind of our curriculum from groups like the Global Acupuncture Project, Pan-African Acupuncture Project, the Guatemalan Acupuncture Medical Aid Project, Richard Mandel, Blake Gentry, and which are kind of just concepts and different protocols that kind of go back to the barefoot doctor movement in China. So NADA is kind of very foundational for how we start out working with communities. And it's a really good protocol for a variety of settings, including mobile clinics and trauma settings, working with people that in settings like with migrants on the border. When we go into the migrant shelters and waters, we're just doing NADA. We keep it really simple. We try to keep it very safe. In the churches where they actually have established clinics, we're able to teach them in that setting other types of points, like the Miriam Lee protocol and balance method. And we also teach them Moxa protocol. So there's an assortment of different curriculum materials. NADA is kind of an introductory, kind of foundational. And but there's room in many projects to teach other protocols. Not every regulatory environment, but some. So every place is different. Every state in the United States is different. Every country is very different. And so our movement kind of serves as a resource to help you, or any group anywhere, to figure out what's the right protocol to start with. That could just be ear acupressure, right? That could be just doing Moxa, or it could be just doing NADA, or it could be other things. So, but our movement is kind of here as a resource to help you figure out what's the most appropriate next step for you, right? That could be, the next step could be going and doing some demonstration treatments in your community, doing NADA, with the long-term objective of teaching other types of things. It could just be NADA that the regulatory environment that you're in is set up for. So does that answer your question, Wasim?
Yeah, sure. So it sums it all, depending on, I guess. I get it. Sure. Thank you.
There's
Can I
go ahead, Megan.
to that, Ryan? So not as great in that it's sort of like a well encapsulated protocol that, certainly like Ryan and I, we've become registered trainers, so that's like in our back pocket. And it's really, you can train somebody in that and have their resulting treatments be safe and effective within a confined time frame. So that might be a nice first place to start. Then it might depend on like how much time are you spending planning on spending with these folks, whatever the community is. How frequently can you go back? Do you want to like go deeper into like body acupuncture, moxa, as Ryan said, herbs, incorporating perhaps traditional medicines? Okay, I won't go down that rabbit hole, but there's a lot of great traditional medicine out there that can be incorporated into a general training for even like social workers or whatever. And then it also might depend on whoever's on your team. So like Beth Cole, who is in Florida, she's a yoga instructor. And so oftentimes we'll pull some yoga training into what we're presenting, or breathing through stress kind of stuff. So I think there's all kinds of ways that you can look at it.
Yeah, and I just want to clarify too, acupuncture by no means is the best therapy for the panacea, and that's definitely not anything we promote. There's, like Megan said, there's lots of different things that can be taught. NATA sometimes is not the simplest thing to be taught to communities, but in certain environments it can be a great resource. Our commitment is to kind of helping communities figure out what's the next best step for them, what's something they can learn. If acupuncture is one of those, then we can offer that. If it's not, then there may be another group out there that has something better to offer them. Groups like Capacitar, they are able to teach, really pragmatic techniques for trauma relief. So yeah, self-help movements are so important for these communities, self-help groups of all types, from Alcoholics Anonymous to other types of peer support groups. So, acupuncture, I feel that acupuncture is best when integrated with other types of existing modalities, not as kind of a cure-all or a standalone. So yeah. Well, this has been a really great afternoon, and if you didn't feel like you got something answered out of that you came here with hoping for, or you want to set aside time to talk more about a certain thread we talked about, or if you've got help you're wanting for your project, just send us an email, crossroadsacu@gmail.com. And so yeah, and you can also find us on Instagram and on Facebook as well. So yeah. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks for the great conversation, you guys. That was amazing to learn.
Thank you, Megan.
Yeah, we hope to hear from you also. Stay in touch.
Bye, thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.
Goodbye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
This is great. Thank you. Thank you.